McCarthyism. Over 100 jailed, more than 10,000 jobs lost, and countless reputations destroyed. One man who lent his name over 50 years ago, but a whole country still feels the repercussions of his actions. Although many think that McCarthyism died when McCarthy himself passed away, it still lives on in the way America recovers from an attack. The American people still try to find solace in a new leader who seems to have all of the right answers. Or so it seems. Joseph McCarthy is a sinister example of a politician looking to get publicity, popularity, and fame at all costs. Maybe he had good intentions in the beginning. We'll never know. But what we do know is that Joseph McCarthy's political agenda trumped his morals and perhaps his sanity. The mark of McCarthy is McCarthyism, and it all began with the birth of the infamous anti-communist man. Joseph McCarthy was born on November 14, 1908 in Grand Chute, Wisconsin, close to Appleton, Wisconsin. Until the 8th grade, he attended Underhill School. At the young age of 20, McCarthy moved to Manoa, Wisconsin, and became the manager of a local grocery store. Meanwhile, he managed to finish 4 years of high school in a meager 9 months. All through his years in college at Marquette University, he was an influential student. Soon after receiving his law degree, he joined a law firm. At his second attempt at public office, he won the post of judge in the 10th Judicial Circuit as a Democrat. In the year 1942, he took a leave of absence and served as a first lieutenant in the Marines. Many historians speculate it was during this period of time that McCarthy realized that as he gained more power, he could manipulate more people into doing his bidding. Throughout his service, Joe was known as the kind of man who used loopholes in the Army regulations to obtain delicacies such as beer and canned turkey for his fellow servicemen. All the while, he honed his arsenal of psychological strategies. In poker, he inconvenienced other players by betting unusual amounts, which slowed and distracted players by having them count out exact money. When he realized that he wanted to run for U.S. Senate, he began to embellish his wartime reputation. He insisted that squadron photographers take heroic pictures of him clad in his flight uniform by planes. He kept the pictures of him and embedded them in a folder he used later to gain points during his campaign. Nowhere was it listed in his job description that he was to experience the front lines. He wanted to build a facade of an all-American service hero, so he convinced the unit's chief gunner to teach him how to shoot the tail guns. That was when he received the nickname Tail Gunner Joe. Another one of Joe's schemes involved an injury that he got during an initiation process, in which he ended up fracturing his foot. Later, when the cast had to be removed, the doctor poured acid instead of another solution in order to break the cast. He used this incident later while adding an amplified account of his heroism to an otherwise true citation. This, along with the portfolio he built with his glorified works, proved beneficial in his campaign. Back at home, McCarthy prepared himself to run for Senate. He had become a Republican in order to establish his political agenda. In 1946, Joseph McCarthy was elected to the United States Senate as Wisconsin's representative. During his term, one of the biggest concerns was the infiltration of communists in the State Department. Between 1947 and 1954, Americans felt threatened by the communists. The intense paranoia throughout the country became known as the Second Red Scare. McCarthy jumped on this issue to win the votes of the Republicans, which proved to be difficult because of his Democratic loyalties back when he was a circuit judge. He took to delivering speeches that contained hours of exaggerated dialogue and hysteria-inducing facts. In response to his accusations, the Senate gathered a committee that opened hearings on March 8, 1950. One of his infamous accusations was directed towards 10 members of the Hollywood film industry. They were named the Hollywood 10. They exercised their Fifth Amendment right not to testify against themselves in court because of the lack of evidence presented by Senator McCarthy and those who were suspicious of the Hollywood 10. Perhaps the most famous member of the condemned blacklist was Dalton Trumbo. As a successful Oscar-winning screenwriter, Trumbo enjoyed an extravagant lifestyle until he was accused. This prohibited him from working because major studios wouldn't hire a person who had affiliations with the Communist Party. After serving 11 months in prison, he exiled himself to Mexico, where he continued to write award-winning screenplays under a pseudonym. He wasn't able to claim the awards the screenplays won him. A popular trial during the spring of 1951 was the Rosenbergs case. When Julius and Ethel met, they joined the Young Communist League. They married, had 2 children, and several years later, Julius Rosenberg was accused of indirectly passing atomic bomb blueprints to the Soviet Union. Ethel was prosecuted as well because she allegedly helped her husband. Roy Cohn, a U.S. attorney, performed much of the cross-examination of David Greenglass, who testified against the Rosenbergs. The jury found the Rosenbergs guilty on all charges after approximately 3 weeks on trial. Julius and Ethel were sentenced to death by the electric chair. To quote Judge Irving Kaufman, "I consider your crime worse than murder." In a later account, Cohn would say that he had convinced Judge Kaufman to inflict the death penalty on the Rosenbergs. In December of 1952, Roy Cohn met McCarthy to talk about the position of chief counsel for the Senators Committee. Although Cohn supported Republican candidates, he was a registered Democrat. Despite that, McCarthy hired Roy Cohn as his chief counsel on January 3, 1953. Several weeks later, Cohn convinced McCarthy to hire David Schein, a close friend. Because of their extremely close friendship, many homosexual rumors surfaced. Ironically, anti-communists thought that homosexuality was a psychological disorder. Furthermore, on September 29, 1953, McCarthy dispelled rumors about his sexual orientation by marrying his assistant of many years, Jean Kerr. In order to understand where McCarthy was coming from, we must first understand the ideology of communism. Communism is the belief that everyone is treated the same by the government. The Soviet Union was one of the major communist countries in the world. The views of the Americans conflicted with those of the Soviet Union. This was because the United States believed that communism was corrupt due to the American way of hard work. Communism didn't motivate its followers, but instead provided the perfect conditions for the lack of innovation. Instead, America chose to follow capitalism, which motivated American citizens to create many products and fueled the country's economy. After crossing the line by trying to investigate the Army in 1953, the Army accused Roy Cohn, a member of McCarthy's legal team, of using his influence to get David Schein, an acquaintance of his, special privileges. The Senate began hearings in April 1954 and they lasted until June of the same year. Joseph Welch was representing the Army. The climax of the hearings came when McCarthy made a remark associating a member of Joseph Welch's legal team with the Communist Party. Welch responded by questioning McCarthy's morals and ethics. The jury made their decision soon after Welch's response drew cheers from the audience. In the beginning of 1955, the Democratic Party had regained control in Congress. Since McCarthy had been censured from the Senate due to his reckless behavior, he was forced to give the chairmanship of his Government Operations Committee to senior Democratic member Senator John McClellan. After McCarthy's reputation was tarnished, he began drinking heavily. This just goes to show that McCarthy's main goal was publicity. Joe and Jean adopted a daughter in January of 1957. They named her Tierney Elizabeth. For a while, Joe's mood was uplifted, but shortly after, he resumed his heavy drinking. In fact, his drinking got so bad that he suffered hallucinations. Because of his heavy drinking, McCarthy contracted severe liver damage, which led to his eventually fatal hepatitis. On May 2, 1957, Joseph McCarthy died of acute hepatitis at 48 years old. Exactly like McCarthy fed the flames of anti-communist hysteria during the Red Scare, politicians today take advantage of America's vulnerability and resentment directed towards terrorists as a result of 9/11. Although America's fears are justified because of the drastic events of 9/11, politicians must strive to carefully wield the double-edged sword, that is, on one end, accusing the guilty, and on the other, condemning the innocent. Now today we ask ourselves, how easy is it for another McCarthy to rise to power? Although he rests only a couple miles from where he grew up, his impact reverberates through time and across America. And from his impact, we learn that a person has the right to express his or her feelings, but holds the responsibility to not cross the line between expression and unjustified accusations. Perhaps during the Army McCarthy hearings, Joseph Welch said it best.
Have you no sense of decency, sir, at long last? Have you left no sense of decency?